Hi, everyone, and welcome to CES this year. I'm incredibly excited to be talking sports, technology, and innovation on the most exciting panel at CES this year, Trends Shaping the Future of Fan Experience. I'm Angela Ruggiero, four-time Olympian in ice hockey, represented Team USA for many, many years, and also started a company called Sports Innovation Lab. I'm the CEO there, where we look at fan experience through the lens of tech. So been studying this and couldn't be more excited to have three tremendous leaders in sport talking about the trends that they see and how technology is absolutely changing fandom. Welcome first, Cathy Engelbert, the commissioner of the WNBA, Stephanie McMahon, the chief brand officer of WWE, and Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the NHL. I can't play favorites here. You know, Gary, you come from hockey, so, you know, I love you. But two wonderful, strong women leading two wonderful leagues. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so I want to kick it off. There's a lot of trends and changes in sports. Obviously, COVID has brought about tremendous changes. You've all had to operate under, tremendous situation with bubbles. Gary, you in Edmonton and Toronto. Cathy, you had to finish your season down in Florida, and same on your end, Steph, with the WWE down at the Thunderdome in Tampa. To kick it off, COVID has changed a lot. I want to know a little bit about, from each of you, around your process for site selection, some of the technologies potentially that have enabled you to keep your fans engaged during COVID, and are there any best practices that you've learned in this time that are going to shape sports moving forward? So, Cathy, maybe we can start with you. You're new to sports, but you're 4 years on the Fortune's most powerful women list. You obviously are bringing tremendous business acumen to your role at the WNBA. Can you tell us about your first season? What a season it's been.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. Thanks for having me. And first, from 33 years at Deloitte, dealing with the emergence of technology and nascent technologies, and we always used to say there that a crisis tends to accelerate and deepen issues that existed before the crisis, but it's also an opportunity to fix those weaknesses and to do some innovation. And I think this year we had to turn our business model on its head with no fans and completely uncharted waters. But what we learned is, we had to have our first ever virtual draft, which I did from this room in my home, and we immediately tapped into technology. I said to the team, we've got to have a way to engage with players on draft night, as well as fans watching at home. So we used an augmented reality Snapchat technology to create a video that we sent to the draft prospects in their gift boxes, and it brought literally a 3D experience. And we know these digital natives, like these draftees, are into Snapchat, so we partnered with them. And we also experimented with a Google Lens app and bringing AR activation during the broadcast on ESPN. And all throughout draft day and thereafter. So that was another area of technology. But I'd say the most one that we're going to carry forward is throughout the season, we built into our WNBA app our first ever second screen experience. Because if all your fans are sitting at home, we called it the Tap to Cheer app, and it allowed for fans to virtually cheer at home. It led to an 85% increase year over year in kind of average weekly mobile app downloads. We actually had 140 million taps during the entire 2020 WNBA season, which for a league the size and scale of us was pretty cool. And there was real-time data integration. Fans started competing with other teams' fans. And so the real-time data integration not only created more awareness around the WNBA, but it created this competitive atmosphere. So, second screen experience is going to be something we all are going to have to live with going forward and innovate around. I mean, according to Nielsen, I think it's something like almost 80% of ages 18 to 24 are using their mobile device while they're watching TV. If you have a teenager like I do, you already know this. And it actually only drops to 60% ages 35 to 49. So this is something that I think that innovation will carry through and will pay dividends as we go forward.
Well, congrats on all your success. Certainly interesting what you've been able to do in this short period of time. Stephanie, how have you been dealing with kind of the new rules as chief brand officer, keeping WWE relevant during this time?
Absolutely. So, and first of all, let me just say again, thank you so much for this panel being the only sports panel at CES, and there are 3 women and Gary. And I'm not leaving you out, Gary. It actually features you and highlights you even more so. But how cool, just in terms of evolution as we continue to evolve, and especially in the sports space. So speaking of, for WWE, it was never a question of if we were going to continue the show. It was a question of how. So we actually went from, our biggest event of the year, which is akin to our Super Bowl. It's called WrestleMania. And that was supposed to take place at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa in front of 80,000 people in the first week of April. So needless to say, that did not happen. It was pretty a last minute call. Really, it was about 3 or 4 weeks right before the event that we made the final decision, and we started producing our content, which is at a minimum 7 hours of live content for our broadcasting cable partner. And there were no fans, and there was no audible audience. We didn't think that we should pipe in audio because that didn't feel authentic. And it was an experience that was less than, to say the least. And then we really did start to experiment. We started adding different technology. We started, piping in audio. We had some of our developmental talent in attendance who were tested, of course, because health and safety comes first, giving live reaction, but it still wasn't enough. So our goal was to be back in arenas, by the fall, but unfortunately that did not happen. So we invested in the Thunderdome. And first we took up residency at the Amway Center in Orlando. And then we partnered with a technology group called the Famous Group that enables us to bring nearly 1,000 fans virtually into the arena live. And we have it set up in the round. So it's multiple levels deep. So it really does feel like the audience is there. And I've actually had the opportunity to perform and to be a part of the show. And it really does feel so much better than having that empty arena, because as we all know in sports, our fans are critical. Their reactions are critical. The delay is a 1.5 seconds, which is a little bit different than some of the other leagues that do have virtual crowds. It's a little bit of a shorter lapse, which is helpful for that real-time reaction. And it also allowed us to experiment with things like virtual reality, augmented reality, pyro, drone cameras was something we were, never able to use before, because you have live bodies in the arena and it's dangerous. But now, sort of the gloves are off and we're learning a ton. And we did start mixing audio and piping that in with the real crowd reactions. And it has been a tremendous additive value. It really did bring the spectacle back to WWE. It brought our fans back to WWE, and we feel alive again.
Love it. Gary, what about you? Longest serving commissioner. You've got some experience. You've never had a pandemic, but how have you dealt with this, and where do you see us headed?
So in addition to being the only guy, you now point out that I'm the oldest one here. Actually,
Wisdom. Share your wisdom with us.
It's great to be with the 3 of you. And I'm going to start, which will be a little bit different as well. How we reacted to the pandemic starts with a low-tech answer. It was, how are we going to come back and play, finish our season? We were 89% through the regular season. We still had the playoffs to go. How are we going to finish it and protect the health and safety of our players, our support personnel, and the communities in which we were playing? And my answer organizationally to that was, we have to be agile, we have to be flexible, and we have to make sure we've considered every option conceivable and be able to execute on it. And so we decided, in conjunction with our players, that we were going to create a return to play format. We have a really, as you know, incredible competitive balance, and there were a number of clubs that hadn't completed the regular season but had a very good shot at making it. So we had to have a play-in round to the playoffs, and we expanded the number of teams. This goes to content, actually. which will take me to technology before I'm done. But we then had protocols we had to work out, again, for safety reasons, and we extended our collective bargaining agreement to deal with the economics and labor piece for the long term. And it was on that basis we said, okay, we've got to get into two bubbles, because with 24 teams coming in, we were dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of people. And we announced everything that we were going to do except where we were going to play at one time. And I got some criticism from the media. Well, why aren't you telling us where you're going? Because the media always wants to know everything immediately. And I had made the decision that we had to study the data, because we didn't want to go to places where there was going to be an increase, a spike in COVID. We needed to make sure that everybody could be safe, that there were enough tests available, that there were enough hospital facilities available. And I made a decision to wait till the very last possible minute to decide where we're going. And we actually changed gears and went to two places we weren't planning on, namely Toronto and Edmonton. And the reason for that, at the time, those were the safest places, major cities in North America. Once we got into the bubble, and we used the filtering process with players working out in their training facilities, being tested regularly, staying home and isolating. We then got into training camp and we started testing every day. And we believed once we got everybody into the bubble, we would be safe. And we conducted, over 2.5 months, 33,000 tests, and not one positive for our players or our personnel who were accompanying them. Now you get to the playing of the games. Steve Mayer, who runs content and events for us, made the decision early on that without fans, which is a vital part of our game, the energy, the excitement of our buildings, the game itself feeds off of our fans, the players feed off the fans. He goes, I've got to turn these arenas into television studios, because whatever we're doing has to work on television. So whether it was the tarping we did over the seats, whether it was the video boards we used in conjunction with the big screen in the scoreboard, center hung scoreboard, whether it was putting noise in, background noise, not to overdo it, but to give you a din that made it feel like a real game. Now, I didn't join the bubble until there was about 3 weeks to go, and then I went into Edmonton. The first game I went to was jarring. I mean, to walk into an empty building, colder than normal, without 20,000 people there, but to go into a building that was empty and watch the game play. But what I found was, after the first game, you didn't even notice it. You were focused on the game. So what did we do? To connect with our fans, we made sure that when we weren't playing, we were putting out tons of content on every digital platform imaginable, creating new content and engaging fans. Once we got to the bubbles, in addition to creating it like a television studio, we brought in more cameras and more camera angles than ever before, because we didn't have to worry about blocking fan views. We started using puck and player tracking, which we were scheduled to do anyway for the playoffs, so that we could create more data and a more connective experience, particularly for young fans, so that they would feel a part of the game, even in the absence of fans in the building. And for toppers, I got to present the Stanley Cup without getting booed, which I thought was a pretty good innovation.
Oh, man. Everyone's cheering you on, Gary. It's always true. Come on. No, congratulations. I know I can't imagine it being any one of your shoes, the complexity of putting on a sports event in this current environment. So again, kudos to everyone there. Cathy, Gary was talking a lot about content, as was Steph, around keeping your fans engaged. We call it immersive media. How do you really bring the fans to you? You saw a 68% year-over-year increase in your viewership numbers during the bubble. I'm curious what you believe were the core tenets to that growth. Obviously, you did a lot with your athletes, empowering them to speak up for social justice. You had your Orange Hoodie campaign. What do you believe really led to that increase of viewership right now on your content strategy or your distribution strategy? Walk us through how you're able to really get fans to lean in during this time.
Yeah, and Angela, as you know, women's sports is really hard on this point, because less than 4% of all media coverage globally covers women's sports. So given the WNBA size and scale, if we didn't have a season, we're a summer season, so we weren't 80% plus through our season, we were 0. And so it would have been pretty existential for us to be out of the sports landscape for more than 20 months, which is what it would have been if we didn't have a season. So we knew we had to do everything we could to, as Gary said, safely, responsibly return to play. And for us, it was to play. We had just come off a very tough but very progressive collective bargaining negotiation and got an 8-year deal, really exciting free agency period. And so I think it was storytelling. We did experience 68% increase in regular season average viewership. We had 90% of our games were covered on some national platform, which is unheard of in our case. So we had obviously our great partner ESPN, also CBS, as well as Facebook stepped up, and on their platforms they did 20 games and Twitter did 10. So, and you mentioned the orange hoodie, which just got the Sports Business Journal Fashion Statement of the Year. So a 350% increase in our merch sales. Ratings for Game 3 of our WNBA finals were up 35% in a very crowded sports landscape. So, it is about promotion, paired with the incredible activism I think WNBA players demonstrated. If you think about a league of 80% women of color and how important it was for them to use their platforms, that this was bigger than basketball. This was a way to engage fans and casual viewers on important issues in society that the country was going through this summer up through the election. So really, really proud of the WNBA players because they got that viewership, not only the highest level of play, highest number of points scored per game in the history of the WNBA, and we'll hit our 25th anniversary season next year. So I think, the momentum around women's sports, which is really hard, I've learned coming into this role, I couldn't be more proud of the players right now and how they're presenting themselves.
Yeah, and one hallmark of what we call fluid fans, these new age fickle consumers, is that they actually follow their values. They're more likely to vote with their wallets and their time on brands and sports properties that align with who they are. So I think you've tapped into unearthing some of the potential in these fans that are really looking for those brands and properties that align with their fandom, if you will, their values. Stephanie, you are one of the best content producers in the world. Sometimes less is more. Having the right content on the right platforms obviously is key, and you're as Chief Brand Officer responsible for it. #1 channel on YouTube, hundreds of millions of followers across your social media channels. Tell me about your strategy. Again, this panel is about fan engagement, fan experience. How important is it to have this multi-platform approach? And can you tell us a little bit more about your strategy at the WWE?
Sure. Well, for WWE, our content strategy is critical. And again, before I get into the answer, Cathy, I have my orange hoodie. So, and congratulations, you're kicking butt all over the place, and it's so cool to see. And WWE's content distribution strategy is really across 3 key areas. So we still very much believe in the linear or pay TV strategy, where in the US we have partnerships with Fox Broadcast and NBCU. Then also our AVOD strategy. So YouTube, you had mentioned we're actually the #1 sports channel on YouTube, but we're the 5th most viewed YouTube channel in the world with over 50 billion lifetime video views, and that does not include UGC content. We also are the 2nd most followed sports brand on TikTok behind the NBA, and hopefully we'll be catching up soon. And then, our 3rd distribution platform is WWE Network, which is our OTT property, which we actually launched right after Netflix and Hulu. We were really one of the first in the space. We launched 6 years ago, and we did. We increased our content strategy across all platforms. So in terms of our relationships with Fox and NBCU during this time, it was challenging for everyone. And we increased the types of content that we actually were providing to our partners to help support them for the sports that actually weren't playing at that time, and the content providers that weren't creating content. Because one piece that I'm not sure is clear, but WWE does not have a season. We have no off seasons, no reruns. We're live every single week. And I think that that's just an important point for clarification. In terms of AVOD, we were experimenting, of course, with different platforms and different types of platforms. But what we also changed was our posting strategy. We started posting longer form clips, and we also started posting more historical content. And we actually saw our YouTube viewership numbers increase 70%. On WWE Network, we invested more heavily in documentary type content that really explored the real person behind the characters. For example, The Undertaker's Last Ride was a huge success for WWE. It was a 4-part documentary. And we saw viewership increase on WWE Network 55%. So I think it's really important from our perspective to reach fans whenever, wherever, however they want to consume content. And I think that, necessity breeds innovation. I think, as Cathy was saying in the beginning of the conversation, what happened, this pandemic just sped up the transition to streaming and consumption behaviors really changing. It just multiplied that factor. It was happening anyway, but it certainly sped up. And it encouraged us and showed us the necessity really to continue reaching our fans on all of those platforms, because that's where they are. And you have to be flexible and nimble, to Gary's point. You have to be fluid. You have to be able to adjust on the fly and make decisions on the fly, the best, most informed decisions you can make. But in order to survive in business in general, but in particular during times like these, that flexibility is really critical.
Mm. Yeah, Gary, maybe you want to touch on that. And you mentioned player puck tracking. You mentioned some of the new camera angles. You've had the opportunity in some ways to experiment as well. And I know with our sport, hockey, sometimes it's just fans don't understand the rules. And so leaning into technology to allow fans to follow, maybe you can touch on both what Steph and Cathy mentioned, but also how you're leaning into tech to help fans engage better, understand the game better, potentially betting. I know is a big theme that we're hearing. Handed over the floor.
Thank you. Well, like Cathy and Stephanie, what we all share in common is passionate fans. And it's that emotional connection to our games or our events that fuels that passion. And particularly with younger people, and particularly when we're fan challenged in person, how you connect becomes even more important. I start with the philosophy, though, you adapt the technology to the game or to the event. You don't change the game or the event to comply with the technology, because in the final analysis, we have to be really authentic to ourselves, and it comes down to the great athletes that do what they do on our various platforms. We believe that giving particularly younger fans the ability to get what they want, how they want it, and when they want it, more than ever before. When I was growing up, so I'll use the age factor, all you could do is imagine what the inside of a locker room looked like. But now we all have these all-access shows which millennials and Gen Zs crave. Not only do they want to know what we're doing in the community and are we embracing social justice and making a difference in people's lives, all things that are more important to them in how they consume sports and what they're passionate about than prior generations, but they also want to know more about the players. They want to know more about what life is like. They want to know more about what leads you to the point of putting on your game or your event. And so we've strived very hard to give them new touch points, whether it's all access shows, whether it's sports betting, whether it's the creation of new data, which is millions of data points a game. I mean, the Fox puck in '95 was the right idea. It was just ahead of its time. We now invested tens of millions of dollars in creating a puck that we can track and being able to track the players as well, how far they're skating, how fast they're skating, where they are in relation to each other, creating all sorts of data points which can bring you into the game, which goes back to your initial point. Our game is so fast that people who don't know it and grow up with it are sometimes intimidated by it. And all of these technology platforms, whether it's puck and player tracking, different camera angles, slow-mo, reverse angle, it can bring you inside the game, slow it down for you, and give you a better understanding. And then once you become a fan, you can do it on your own terms, whether it's a second screen for data, or even we'll have the capability to do it, consume the game from whatever vantage point you want. You want to sit on the goalie's shoulders and see what the game looks like? We're going to be able to do that for you. And we have great technology partners, Verizon, SAP. We have an incredible collaboration with Apple. You see our players actually using iPads on the bench so that they can break down game footage in real time to see what's going on and where they need to be positionally. And all of that comes together, but it starts with the fact that we all have terrific games, terrific events, and great athletes.
Yeah, no, I love that. And to your point, massive technology companies are coming into sport at an accelerated pace, helping us understand our games, helping us deliver better experience for your athletes. I'm wondering, and this whole conversation has been around the fan experience, how is the business of sports changing as a result? Maybe you can all go around the horn, give your perspective on, how technology is changing fandom, but also your respective businesses.
Yeah, I'll play off of something Gary just said, which I think is the important evolution is these technology partnerships, and no one sports league can do it alone without big technology partners who are innovating and have the capital to innovate, to drive whether it's the fan engagement, whether it's data. I mean, a big focus of my prior life was on data and digital. And, sporting events remain one of the only types of content people watch live anymore. So, and you think of consumer behavior around attention span, how much it's altered, and the multitasking that occurs, especially in this pandemic with work from home and, kind of the digital experience in the hands of fans everywhere. And so it's really changing the business and how we interact with fans and everything Gary said. So I think this kind of partnership and making sure that we all get the best thinking around how to evolve our technology platforms, whether it's in arena, whether it's in the fans' hands, whether it's at the office, quite frankly, when we finally get back in. I mean, there's so much that's changing, because the one thing I've learned in my year and a couple months in this role is that sports is big business. Big business is about relationships, and relationships are about building these technology partnerships, especially around real-time gamification and behind the scenes content. And obviously Gary talked about, betting, and then there's polling and trivia, and, there's just so many things that change our business model, and the second screen experience too, that, and how everything you do in technology and sports is a sponsorable asset as well. And that's going to change your revenue streams and broaden, hopefully, especially for the WNBA, the revenue streams.
I'll just jump in, and I couldn't agree more in terms of all of the different technology partners, how they apply, the different sponsorship streams, driverless trucks. When you think about, WWE, we're on the road 365. So how is that going to impact wearable tech for the athletes? Any number of different e-commerce. We saw our e-commerce business increase 60%. It actually offset the loss of venue merch, which was we were very grateful for, quite frankly. But I think one of the biggest and most important points about technology and sports harkens back to something that Gary just said, was about the passion and the emotional connection. And I think, and something you said too, Angela, the values, when your values align as a viewer, as a fan. I think that's where the intersection of tech, where it really becomes successful, is when it creates an emotional experience, an emotional connection for the audience. And from there, the rising tide raises all boats. And just one small example I'll give is, we had the Undertaker, who I mentioned before. He retired after 30 years in the ring. And he is one of the most iconic superstars of all time. And he actually paid homage. We actually call it Shakespeare. He gets down on one knee and he raises his hand, and he used to look up to his manager, whose name was Paul Bearer. Forgive the camp. It is, the storytelling and the characters. But Paul Bearer had unfortunately passed, and we brought him back to life in this retirement show as a hologram. And to talk about it brings goosebumps because it was real and it was emotional. And it was a moment nobody thought that they would ever see again. And they probably saw it for the very last time. And that's when I think tech, really is really the most successful it can possibly be, is when it generates that emotional connection that touches people that they remember.
Gary, close us out. 30 seconds. Take us home.
I agree with Stephanie and Cathy completely, but it does start with our fans. And you see the way everything is evolving. This panel, doing it virtually, the fact that if this pandemic were 25 years ago, I'm not sure how any of us would have been able to work. You need to evolve with the times, but you also need to stay true to the people who love whatever it is you're doing, whether it's the WWE events or it's basketball or it's hockey. It's about being authentic and using technology to connect people in more ways than ever before. That creates additional income streams, but I'm not sure there's anything in sports that's as important as having the people who attend live, because that's what brings people of all backgrounds, of all diverse ways of life together with a common dream and a common passion and a common emotion. And that's really the businesses that we're all in.
Tech is the means to the greater end, bringing the world together through the lens of sport. Sport has such power, and you all are leading the way. So thank you so much, Stephanie, Gary, and Cathy. Keep doing what you're doing, and thank you for being on this panel today and sharing your wisdom, respective wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank
Be
you.
safe, be healthy.